Now that we know how to do a row click and a cell click, we're going to add a button click to each row. Let's take a peek at that. So again, we're talking about in the builder choosing this option for the button click. And when you get presented here, you're going to be told I'm a button and I'm using the on button integration script. And then down here, we have this choice of, again, each row or the entire table. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the each row feature. And when you choose that, you're going to get another option to say, do I want to have the entire row or the entire table? I'm sorry, entire row or a specific value. So let's keep going and see where we're going to get here. When we click the entire row, we are actually, having the same set of code on both things. We're using a function called button on click, and you can see that on the top. So when we click that, we're telling it, what do we actually want it to do? And the only change that's happening when we choose the entire row versus the specific value is basically what we're passing in the object. So it's not difficult to do. It's just what we're changing to tell FileMaker, this is what we clicked. I want you to just pass this value or the entire row. So take a peek at this code just to see if you can get an understanding of how the button click is very similar to the row click and the cell click, but it just has a different function at the top that it's assigned to. Okay. The main difference between the row click and the button click is that we're actually, when we add a button to the row, we're actually adding a new column. And that is kind of similar how we did before, where we manage it in the column. So you can kind of see in this example, before we had company name, address, city, state, those are fields that came from our data, and we had created them and gave them display names in a prior lesson. So what we did here is in the function, I have code that has been built to say, go create another column and put this rendered button in its field instead of actually using data. So what does that look like? All right, the column is actually added. So remember, it's not in the data. We didn't get that from any source, but we're telling it to display differently. So I am basically creating an empty record. There's data is null. I set the ordering to false. And this whole function here in red in this box is the render function to say, create a button and give it a label and do something with it. That's the important code that you need to understand how it's put there. And the rest are, I'm not searchable. I am visible, but I don't have a title, or I do. So you can change that too. Remember, just like any other column, we can go into the columns builder and we can modify this. So I will show you this in the demo that we can go into it and actually rename the button, reposition where it's located, and do some other information to that column, like hide it if we end up saying, but on this report, we don't want it, but we're going to leave the code. Okay, so let's hop into the demo file and see what that looks like. We're in the demo file 4.4, and we're going to start looking at adding button on clicks. Let's hit quick start. Last time we finished up by adding an on cell click. So let's just do our process of doing the buttons again by duplicating the record. And let's go ahead and say 4.4 here, and we're going to change this to being a button click. All right, everything else can stay the same, and submit and close that. Again, this duplicated record here still has the cell integration, so let's go and take that off. Going into our integration, let's hit remove integration. And I'll just prove to you that the click is gone. It's back to our integration, and we're going to add an on button click. You can see here that the integration changed to button. The on click is there. This is still remained as the context. But what we have here is two options. In this lesson, let's just focus on the each row. So what we're talking about here is adding a button to each row instead of having the entire row be clicked. It's much more visual friendly maybe for your users to understand, and you can get to control what that button says. So when we hit each row, then we have it back to the same thing we learned about in rows. Do we want to return the entire row of data or a specific value? So for the purposes of right now, let's just go with the entire row and we won't select anything here. When we see there's two other fields here, I'm going to leave them to be right now, but there's a field called define me for the button name, and the class is called button. I'm going to hit submit and close, and we're going to go look at this. The only thing different in our code is that we're actually running a button click event. And then when we're saying when that button gets clicked, I need to know some information because we're doing the entire row. We're actually saying, hey, get this information. So this is the hard part to understand. And then as you guys see that we've done before, we're constructing a JSON object, and I'm just cleaning that up a little bit, but we are basically saying, in this case, I'm telling you in the code that I'm passing what was clicked, and then I'm returning the row data, and again, the report and table name, same thing that we've done before. So now let's go look at preview and see what happens over there. Okay, we have a button that's called define me with the word action at the top. Not too bad. I think that looks okay as standard out of the box. When I click this, what do I expect to happen? I expect the entire row to be repeated back to me. All right, cool. I'm getting the same thing. I've added a couple extra things here. You can see I responded with the trigger, and I'm saying, hey, I'm just responding back with an ID field and some other things. And then the word platform is here. Okay, where did that come from? Well, if we go look at the script for the on click button, I have basically collected the parameter at the top, and then I have just said, hey, what kind of platform is the user on? And then I've added that element to my response, and I'm showing the user something. So you can still, this is just pointing out that I didn't pass that in through my JSON code, but I am actually responding back and doing something with it. So you can still manipulate your information in FileMaker and come back with this. Okay, so that is pretty cool. But how are we getting this button to actually appear in the row? Well, there's a little bit of complexity with buttons. And so when you first chose in this example that we were going to do each row versus the entire table, by selecting this each row, we are actually creating a columns record. So we need to go look at that and see what I'm talking about. So let's hit columns here. And right now, I know this isn't that pretty, but there's this rendering function happening here. And this, see how company names here is the next column? This is not actually a field that came from the data tab. Adding a button is like adding another data field or column to your report. Let's go look at the columns integration to see what that looks like. Okay, so before we had the action, the company name, address, city, state, zip, that's fine. When we clicked that integration, there's code in my program here that basically says, go add a new column to the report and identify it as a button. So you can kind of see here that it's here. I've taken off that it's searchable and orderable. I do have that it's visible, but we can control a couple things. Do you see this display name says action? I did that by default, but let's just completely remove it. We don't want to see that. Let's go see what that looks like. When we do that, we have basically just removed this. Now let's go into the columns, and we can do two things. We can define the name of define me where we did in the integration, or we can do it back on the columns. So let's go do that here. If we hit the columns button and hit the integration, do you see that I've identified that this is a button? You can change the name here. So we're going to call this view me with just like that. And then when I hit submit changes and I come back, the button has now been called view me. All right, that's probably about enough for figuring out how the buttons are. We will get into controlling the styling of this button later, but I do want to point out that the button has a class right now called button, and I have put that work in here in this it is actually not in there, and that is why it is not working. It's just a placeholder. So there's no CSS and formatting happening yet, but in a future lesson, we're going to talk about stylizing this and doing some other things to the button. All right, so we just did the adding a button on click, and pretty simple. we're going to do this one, and let's go ahead and we're going to do the, right now it's returning the entire row. So let's do that. And we're going to go back to the other one and do the example. So on this one, we're doing entire row, and let's save that, right? And now let's duplicate this quickly. And we're going to just keep it the same thing. But we're going to do this one is the specific. We're going to get practice with this, a specific value again. And we're going to do one other thing with our button. So let's submit and close that. So we have this one with view me, and we don't have it here. The button is not here at the moment. I do want to just see my columns did not duplicate in this case. So let's go and do the integration step and try something here. Let's remove the integration. Let's add an on button click. And in this case, we're going to do it for the row, and we're going to say specific value. In this case, let's go ahead and just return the primary key or the ID field. And right here is where the word define me is. And I'm going to just say this is going to be edit or say hello. I don't know. We're just going to put whatever we want there. And we're going to submit and close this. And we are going to go see that the word hello is there. So you could have changed the button label there or somewhere else. Now I have the columns here with the word action. And you can also see that the word, I defaulted the word action up here. So if you ever want to change this, you do need to get in the columns. But let's go into columns and let's do a couple things. First, I don't think we need to have a title. I just put it in there to show you that you can. We have the word hello here. I'm just going to say view me again, but this time lowercase. And the other thing I want to show you is that by default, when you add a button in the code, I'm having it be in the first position. But since this is actually a record, we can move this to anywhere we want. So if I hit the modifier key or hit shift and hit this arrow down, it's going to go all the way down to the last open position that's visible. So now it's going to be in the last spot. So let's submit those changes and go look at our report. And do you see how we changed the word view me, and we moved the button to be in this location? So you still have the control of where it's located, and we're only returning the specific value of ID here. So you have lots of control on what you're doing. That's how buttons in the row work. We showed you two examples, one with the view me here in the first position, and the other one with it over here, and how you can control the label and where it's located and what it returns. In the next video, we're going to go into one more topic about buttons and about not putting it in the row, but actually adding it to the table itself.